poor and the most marginalized and vulnerable communities through empowerment and tailor-made economic inclusion approaches. Before kicking off the event, I just would like to highlight that the last 20 minutes of this event will be an open Q&A for you to just write your doubts or your comments to Dr. Sunit Adhikari. So I would like to encourage you to use the Q&A button, and then I'll be happy to read and share them, the questions with Dr. Sunit Adhikari. Without further ado, Dr. Sunit, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Orlando. Can you hear me? That's everything.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. So I have about 12 slides. So I'll go through the slides, and then I'll take the questions and discussion on that one. So I'll share the slides. Yeah. Can you hear this? Sorry, can you see this?
Yes, we work perfectly. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to be the part of Geneva Challenge 2022. So as Alonso said, I'm working with SAPPROS Nepal and mainly focusing on these livelihoods and resilience, economic resilience of the poor and vulnerable people. So my presentation today is mostly based on the post-reconstruction, post-livelihood, post-reconstruction phase after the earthquake, the big earthquake 2015 in Nepal. So rising from the rubbles, supporting post-earthquake recovery for the most vulnerable families in Nepal. So I'll share my experience. What was our approach? What are our practices? What were the gaps and challenges, and what lesson we learned? So that will be helpful for you guys to understand about the Nepalese context, and maybe for me to learn, to have the opportunity to learn from your perspectives. First, just a brief introduction about SAPPROS Nepal. It was a non-government, non-profit humanitarian organization established in 1991. So out of 76 districts in Nepal, we have our outreach increased to 52 districts, serving more than almost 0.6 million households. So SAPPROS and its chairperson, chairperson, has received the Right Livelihood Award in 2010. So its vision is a poverty-free Nepal where people can engage themselves in innovative initiatives to increase opportunities for doing so. So we focus on opportunities, increasing the opportunities for these people to reduce their poverty. So we work with the mission of reducing poverty in the country by assisting women, poor, marginalized groups, socially excluded and vulnerable communities. These are our primary beneficiaries, primary target groups, through mobilizing local livelihood capitals and resources, through reducing disaster risks and building innovative technology-based productive infrastructures, and promoting their meaningful participation and leadership in planning and decision-making at all levels. So that's the organization strategy and priority sectors. So I don't go through all these ones. So we have 5 main thematic areas. So organizational development and capacity building, infrastructure and WASH. So food security and livelihood. Similarly, is education, health and nutrition, and gender resilience and climate justice. So gender equity and social inclusion, sustainability and safeguarding is a cross-cutting across all thematic areas. SAPPROS draws on expertise across a wide range of sectors and subsectors, because we have 5 different sectors, thematic areas. So it is committed to gender equality, diversity and inclusion as fundamental principles of our work in all projects in all sectors. So it has over 125 staff representing diverse professional background, perspectives and skills, and share a commitment to the mission of the organization. So these are just a brief glimpses of key projects implemented by SAPPROS after 2006. So these are the key projects, about 19 key projects that we have implemented, and most of them are focused on livelihood improvements, livelihood restoration, productive water usage, and integration of these was infrastructure and livelihood activities. So I don't go through all these ones. So 9 activities still ongoing, and other 10 activities we have already completed. Now the perspective of the project that we implemented, or the post-recovery activities. So it's based. My presentation is based on Gorkha earthquake, the recovery, livelihood recovery of after the Gorkha earthquake of 2015. So 25th April 2015 and 12 May 2015, there are 13 districts. The earthquake, 2 big earthquake hit the country, and 13 districts severely affected and 19 districts moderately affected, and millions of people were affected due to this earthquake. So for us, the vulnerable, who are the most vulnerable? We work with the most vulnerable to restore their livelihood. And who are the most vulnerable? So these are the 5 categories, 5 groups of people that we worked, and that we categorize as most vulnerable and we work with. So single women, who are single and usually female-headed households, senior citizen above 65 years of age, child-headed households, because parents were lost, these all lost their parents in the earthquake, and persons with disability, people living with disability due to the earthquake, mainly due to the earthquake, or even some other reasons. So, and experiencing such extreme poverty, they have not been able to access other programs. For example, landless, ethnic minorities, and poor Dalits. So Dalits here, you may not know about the social structure in Nepal. So there are caste-based structure, which is, and there are so-called Dalits who are also, untouchables. People treat them like untouchables. So they are usually the most marginalized, poor, and the vulnerable people. So these are, we work with them as one of the most vulnerable people in Nepal. So first, the approaches. The approaches for this livelihood outcomes, or for reducing the poverty of these vulnerable people, is the sustainable livelihood and resilience approach, which includes 4 major points, 4 major aspects. First, the sustainable livelihood framework. So we just didn't work with the economic part, or just recovering the income of the people, or just on the food security. So we work on the 5 livelihood capitals, the framework that defined by the DFID in 1991. So the physical, social, natural, financial, and these aspects, human resources. So these are the aspects, 5 capitals that we work with. So we worked in together to build this capacity to promote access of these people, vulnerable people, to these capitals, to these assets. So another approach was improved capabilities, assets, and activities for a means of living. Until and unless we improve the capabilities of these vulnerable people, all these efforts, all these supports are wasted. That's why we focus on that one. Then the next is targeted, tailored approach to livelihood restoration. So we don't just use a blanket approach. We use the targeted, tailored approach to livelihood restoration. Each livelihood intervention was different between each of the individuals. So that was our approach. And most importantly, and linking livelihood intervention with income generation and employment, saving and credit practices, which is vital for the for achieving the resilience, or for increasing the resilience of these vulnerable people, group mobilization to improve their bargaining power, and capacity building and disaster preparedness, so that they can be prepared when next time the disaster hits. So these were the approaches that we. So what about the overall pathway? We have defined the pathway, and in most of the projects we follow this pathway. So understand the action. First, understanding. We need to have the understanding the vulnerability, understanding their needs, their choices, their feasibilities. Then we understand their vulnerability, their choices, their interests, their resources. Then empower for change. So understand for action, empower for change. Then provide safe living environment for example, safe housing construction, support for safe housing construction, and inclusion for economic opportunity and resilience. These were the pathway, 4 different pathways that we follow step by step. And vulnerability assessment was the first in that ladder, and diagnostic will underpin the design and implementation, because I already mentioned tailored and targeted approach. We follow tailored and targeted approach to livelihood restoration. So for that, we assess the vulnerability and design the program accordingly and implemented it. You can see in the pictures that 2 persons with disabilities, Punya Prasad Pokhrel and Hariprasad Pandey, actually they were assessed vulnerability, their skill, their resources, their interest were assessed before providing them to supports, and they have been provided to the support that they are capable of doing, despite being disabled, or the skill they have, like the Hariprasad Pandey, he has his skill in carpentry, so we supported him that way. So this way we focused on targeted and tailored approaches. So practices, that were the approaches. So practices, what practices we followed for that is equitable support with the leave no one behind framework. This is the framework that we usually followed in most of the projects, leave no one behind. So understand, empower, and support, the basic steps for this one. The vulnerability assessment, that's the starting point, and resource capacity and service provision mapping for reaching out to the most vulnerable people. Because resource sustainability, capacity sustainability, service provision, or linkage, these are the basic things that we need to sustain in order to sustain an intervention or a livelihood outcomes. That's why we focus on mapping of these activities from the beginning. Then we organize these vulnerable people in self-help groups, mobilize saving credits, because saving credits, we consider them as a means of resilience. Once for every future disasters, if they have the saving, then they can sustain their life for some reason until they get the support. And credits, it's also important for them to invest for their income generating activities. So in every projects, we mobilize saving credits and groups capacity strengthening to adopt and upgrade economic activities for livelihood resilience. So demonstration is another important part of our intervention. We don't just provide the supports, and because usually they are not sustainable. So we follow this demonstration and promotion of low-cost, climate-resilient, innovative technologies for increased productivity and better outcomes. Because climate-resilient technologies is very important for this, for the people who are suffering from this climate change impacts. It's all over the world that people are suffering one way or another from the climate change impact. So we are to address those impacts, to address that issues, we have focused them. We have concentrated on climate resilient innovative technology that are low cost and easy to learn, easy to understand by these vulnerable people. And skill development, of course, there is a skill part for income, increased income and access to employment. That could be technical skill, technical enterprise development, financial literacy, and in some cases who cannot participate in these activities, we have also supported them through vulnerability allowance. So just to continue on the practices, scaling up, then once they are supported for this and they started continuing their economic activities, they start doing that and they get the benefits, and they realize that even the vulnerable people can engage in economic activities and earn some income and be independent. Then we focus on scaling up and diversification of those economic activities for increased competitiveness of vulnerable people for economic resilience through market system development support. So we also support them in market system development and value chain activities and institutionalization of their enterprises. We help them to register their enterprises and get linkage with the government agencies to get funding for those enterprises. So I already mentioned that this cross-cutting issue, gender and social equality, gender equality and social inclusion. So we focus in all phases of our projects implementation, gender and social inclusion and safeguarding, especially safeguarding of children and safeguarding of vulnerable adults and these vulnerable people. So coordination and collaboration with local governments, that's one of the important component of our project implementation for resource leverage and support ownership of the economic inclusion activity once the project is phased out, and that's very important. And we have lots of learning that good timely and good coordination and collaboration has led to the sustainability of the projects. Support to local governments to replicate the not only coordination, we also support technically provide the technical assistance support to the local government to replicate the institutional arrangement with private sector service provider, but for better service. So here comes the linkage with the market sector, private sector, market actors, which is very important in this value chain for this lovely, better livelihood outcomes. So involvement of vulnerable people in local government's annual activity and budget planning process. Usually these people are excluded from any of these government planning process or budgeting process or even in activities. So they are involved from the beginning, and they demand for their as per their needs for the activities and program, and accordingly they implement their program on their own after this when the government starts implementing the activities. So capacity building of private sector provides for better service delivery. That's we encourage local governments for these institutional arrangements, as well as we also provide support to the private sector service providers for better delivery, input supply, and technical support. However, still there are some gaps and challenges while doing this, for this livelihood economic activities, and that's why this poverty reduction activities is still not successful in some of the cases, in some of the projects. So one is that we have learned, that we have experienced not only in our projects but in the Nepalese context, is vulnerable support planning without adequate information. Usually the vulnerability, accessibility, the availability, sourcing and use of these information are not, there is no available availability of this vulnerability assessment, which leads to inefficient support, missing out on the target needs and timing of the support. So soft skills, which is very important, particularly for the people who are not very much literate. So these soft skills are very important for improving their personal attributes, personality traits, motivation, leadership, and communication activity, which seems under considered in livelihood recovery interventions in Nepal. The return on investment is low due to the small scale and lack of value addition. There is very poor value addition in that, and very poor understanding about the value addition, which might quickly deter households from sustaining these new interventions. They get demotivated in some cases. So market actors are still not considered the key actors in livelihood recovery and restoration. So efforts for market system integration are largely one-off and unsystematic because they are not considered as key actors in this whole process. So JC considerations are not fully mapped, planned, or implemented. So this is mostly considered at the beginning, then not during the implementation. So vulnerable households are often at the losing end in business transaction, as they are low in the value chain ladder and have little bargaining power because they are poor and in a social structure, socio-economic structure like in Nepal, they are always in lower value chain ladder, and they don't have much bargaining power. They don't know their rights and entitlement, so they don't get much return from this. The projects for vulnerable support is still operating in silos of sector approach targeting championing agency mandates. Tailored support through holistic program for recovery is still lacking. Most of the projects they implement on a blanket approach, which is one of the reasons for not very successful outcomes of this livelihood recovery activities. So with this, we have some very good lesson learned. So first, the intervention should address barriers faced by vulnerable groups and level of support they need to recover their livelihood. So we have to address to the barriers, not to the activities that they want to implement. So first, we have to hit the barriers and vulnerability assessment and that research, that is the first thing that we need to do to identify these barriers and gaps for this livelihood support. So tailor-based, these include tailor support based on capacity, needs, and vulnerability, and guided by L&OV concept. The strata of social and economic vulnerability within the vulnerability should be considered. So the strata, socio-economic vulnerability, what's the social vulnerability, what's the economic vulnerability, and then only we can hit on these variables. So engagement of non-vulnerable, and usually sometimes what happens is these vulnerable people are supported just as an isolation, and non-vulnerable people are not considered for these projects. As a result, these vulnerable peoples are not getting support from the non-vulnerable people, who usually holds the power, politics, and economic activities in the region. So that part is also important. So we have started engaging non-vulnerable people for sustainable socioeconomic outcomes, and strengthen financial resilience contributes to rapid life. So financial resilience, that's I was talking about, is this saving and credits practices in a group that we are mobilizing. And in SAPPROS implemented projects, it's about 36 million Nepalese rupees is revolving in within the women groups, that we have formed for last 20-25 years. And that's the estimated figure, and average 50 to 100 rupees per month per person they save in these groups, and they mobilize for this economic activities and other household activities. So move from individual-based production and marketing to group-based approach. That's also lacking because of these low production. People are not getting the right price for these products. So we have moved. It is important to move. Excuse me, for individual-based production to the market, group-based production and marketing. And strengthen market linkages. I already mentioned that's one of the challenges. Market actors are not considered as key actors in this one. So strengthening market linkages and linking and networking these private sector service providers and market actors is important to ensure sustainability of the economic inclusion activities. So final, coordination and collaboration with local governments for risk management. That's not also for the support, not also for the financial support, but also risk minimization, replication, because they have the fund to replicate this one. I already mentioned we mainly focus on the demonstration and promotion of the technologies. So sustainability and ownership towards project, developing affirmative policies and actions, because at the end of the day, they are the agencies who are responsible for making policies, but we support them in formulating like inclusive livelihood policies and others guidelines and working documents, so provide technical support for them, and that's why it's also important for them. And without this support, it's not possible for getting the best livelihood outcomes. The key messages from these ones is build back better with vulnerable at the front. So if you put the vulnerable at the front, then only build back better is possible in case of disasters. Working with the existing systems, coordination and facilitation. We don't want to create new system or change everything. Just we work with the existing system to make it better and efficient. So through the coordination and facilitation, leave no one behind and do no harm. That's our approach for reaching out to the last mile. Feedback mechanism is the key for efficient programming. Feedback from the beneficiaries, from the vulnerable people. Usually that's not considered in most of the things, activities. So that's one of the effective measures. So technology transfer through demonstration and ensuring sustainability and behavior change. So we focus on behavior change. Not on just giving and supporting on technical or the physical financial thing. We focus on behavior, demonstration and behavior change to understand and prepare for the climate change and multi-hazards, and integrated programming to address the multifaceted needs and vulnerability to develop resilient community. So we include, this includes, I already mentioned 4 aspects: disaster preparedness, this infrastructure was, and then livelihood, economic and on-farm and non-farm activities. We focus on integrated approach to develop the overall needs of the vulnerable people to develop resilient communities. Thank you very much. That's all about my presentation. So yeah, if you have any questions, any queries, so I would be happy to answer them.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Sunit. It was like very comprehensive, and congratulations on the work you're doing in Nepal with SAPPROS, with your organization. I think I would like to encourage our attendees, like if they have any questions, just please write them in the Q&A, and then we will be happy to discuss it with Dr. Sunit Adhikari. I think to kick off the conversation, I have some questions myself. I think the first one, it's a very important process of skill development. We see, like in many countries, especially in Asia and the Pacific, there are many vulnerable groups, women, youth, ethnic minorities, or disabled persons that are working, right? But they're trapped in vulnerable and informal employment. Of course, this vulnerable and informal employment is characterized by low incomes, no access to social protection, and so on and so on. So I wanted to, I guess my first question is related to the working poor and those in the informal labor market. So what policies would you highlight, for example, as efficient to overcome these barriers of the working poor? Thank you.
Thank you, Orlando. That's one of the biggest challenges. The working poor is one of the biggest challenges, who are the hardest hit by any such disasters and any other pandemics, like we can say the COVID-19 pandemics and other disasters. So and that's the thing that we are working. That's why we are working on these all approaches, because most of the projects that we are focusing at the moment is on economic, just on the income generating activities, and the other aspects, other parts, other assets, other capitals required for the sustainable livelihoods or required for the resilience is missing. Particularly these people, they don't have sustainable income, they don't have sustainable employment or the permanent employment. Any small disaster or any small changes could severely affect to their livelihoods and to their living standards. So that's one of the policies that we should focus in this context, in this work labor context and these vulnerable people context. It's the policy that we need to focus on these for all aspects of these livelihood, sustainable livelihood capitals, especially the human capitals, the capacity building, and then the social capitals. Social capitals building their group or strengthening their group, and also linking it with the government for resource leverage and resource for providing them the resources, for providing them the support they desire, and they're making them aware about their rights and entitlements through involvement. So these type of policies are lacking in our contracts, and that's why these vulnerable people and these low honor work groups are usually left behind in all these vulnerable peoples. Also, there is no linkage with the private sectors or with the market providers, private service providers, because usually the private service providers or the market access, they are the key parts of this value chain, but they are considered just as a middleman or the brokers, and they are not linked with these people. And also lacking this I mentioned in my presentation the pathways, that the vulnerability assessment, that's the first thing that should design the program, the activities, the intervention, but that's also lacking because it's more or less supply driven activities that we are following, and that's where we are that's one of the reasons for the failure and for not including these working group people. Orlando.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your presentation. And it's really important that you mention, of course, the challenges that the government face, and of course all the actors that are included in this process of leaving no one behind. I think also this question relates to the second question before opening the Q&A to the public. And in this one I just wanted to highlight another kind of trend that we have seen going, and it's the movement from rural to urban areas. So right now, especially in Asia and the Pacific, Latin America, and in some cities in Africa, we can see that this movement have been very, very unsustainable. And a big share of the world poor live today in slums. So we're talking about the urban poor and then the challenges of the slums. So in this one, I just wanted to know if you could just highlight, for example, with your experiences in SAPPROS Nepal, what would you see the challenges of bringing basic services, for example, water and sanitation, electricity, and also opportunities, for example, education, to this bigger share of the population that now is just stuck in living in urban slums?
Yeah, thank you, Orlando. That's one of the very relevant questions, even in post-disaster phase. Basically, the people, the migration from the rural people from the villages to the urban areas is growing, and is going to be alarming in the coming days. Even in Nepal, though the slum, as we have heard, as you have read in India and other countries, and it's not that alarming in Nepal, but it's growing. And one of the reasons for this one is disaster or the conflict, and another is looking for the jobs and the employment problem, income problem. That's the main reasons for this one. So the thing is, the first thing is slums or resettlement areas. In our context, I would also like to say the resettlement area, because we don't, as I said, we don't have much slums. There are some, but also that's part of the resettlement area, or people affected by this disaster. They are moved to the safer areas and public lands, and they are sort of like slums. So first of things is these areas are usually unauthorized or unauthorized occupied areas by these people. So looking for safe land, safe for job and other reasons, or maybe in some cases there are few negative consequences of these ones. So these people are political. There are political issues, the political interest behind their people. The leaders have political parties. They also consider these as vote banks, and even there are elite domination even within those slums and rent seekers behavior there. So these are the activities. So that's why one of the reasons is government is reluctant to provide the basic facility in those things, because they are unauthorized settlements. The first thing is that, and second thing is that it's related to the livelihood. Allocating housings in safer areas and providing other supporting other infrastructure activities, not in the very urban areas, but in a rural setting, in a rural areas. The government, even in Nepal, the government has government and other the development agencies, they have they have constructed the houses for them after the earthquake. They have houses and provided houses to these people, to these affected people, but they are reluctant to live in that one, and they all are moving to the urban areas and living in a slum. So one of the reasons is when offered a house in a village, they do not want to go there. So there are two reasons, because first, and we think it's the most important thing, is the livelihood opportunity. There is very little livelihood opportunities there, and anyway, people have to come to the urban areas for the livelihood, for their daily wages or other activities. Then why should they? How could they live in that area? So until and unless the policymakers or they start thinking about these livelihood activities and these resettlement areas together, at the same time, when they start thinking about the resettlement area or the reconstruction of the safer housing for these conflict-affected people or disaster-affected people, then we should think about the livelihood interventions, livelihood options, livelihood opportunities for those people in those areas. Unless and until we do that, we will not be successful in that one. So these challenges are highly magnified in post-disaster and post-conflict situation, because people do not have basic facilities, and they don't have other alternatives than moving to the urban areas. So when they don't have any income, they don't have food to eat, and they don't have employment opportunity, then that's the only thing left for them. So the policy, at the policy level, the policymakers should think how these peoples can be resettled in those areas, and how these livelihood interventions can be implemented, designed and implemented, so that these people can be attracted in those villages or in those outside areas, and move them out of. So we should think about the incentive, we should think about the policy to divide them, to bring them out of the slum and work in that areas. So it's not that easy. It's very difficult in case of slums, but in our experiences, in case of post-disaster and post-conflict situation, it's not that difficult as in the slum. So that should be the focus of the policy focus of the governments, and also the other agencies working at that should advocate for that. That's what we are doing in our organization. Yeah, thank you, Orlando. Back to you.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I just wanted to emphasize the word, the incentives, that I think it's key in this conversation of the challenges of poverty reduction. I had one question myself, but since we still have like a couple of minutes, but I'm seeing many questions in the Q&A, so I think it's better to move the conversation to the questions in the Q&A. I was wondering, Dr. Sunit, do you feel comfortable in taking 2 questions at a time? So I'm going to read it to you, and then you can reply to both of them. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm going to read by priority order. The first one is from Seve Chakrabarti, and the question is, what are the challenges that you face on the behavioral aspects from the individuals? This would be the first question. And then the second question for Ayam Feolua is about the parameters that you use to measure the progress of your projects. So how do you quantify the impact of your projects? So if you want, let's take these two questions first. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Orlando. Thank you for the questions. I go to the first one, the challenges and the behavior aspects. It's very interesting and very relevant questions when you talk about this poverty reduction, because usually we consider the poor people as very inferior group of the society, or very we usually neglect them. We do not consider, we do not think about learning their behavior. That's what we consider. We go through this vulnerability assessment. While we do the vulnerability assessment, that's one of the thing, the behavior aspect. But there are lots of challenges for this one. First thing is, people usually think that people are usually living in unauthorized land, and because other limitations, other things. So because of that, they do not cooperate, and they show that type of behavior. But once they are they understood their things and they are supported, so the behavior that they demonstrate at the beginning is due to not understanding of these people. So we have to look at the broader picture, their food security behavior, their income behavior, their employment behavior, and then overall other social behaviors. So in a society like ours, where we have these problems, social and economic strata, different stratas, so these behaviors, understanding these behaviors is very important. And once we got that, that's why we start this vulnerability assessment. We understand their behaviors, what their choices and what their interests are, and what are the feasibility in that one, and then we start from them. So our focus is to bring change on their behavior, to their economic behavior, to their social behavior, and to their resilience behavior. So it's a difficult task for us to understand at the beginning, and later as we move on, we succeed on that one. So regarding parameters to measure the progress, actually when we do the assessment, we carry out the baseline activities. We have this basically the livelihoods. Talking about the livelihoods, I already mentioned we consider 5 assets, 5 capitals. So we focus on these ones. So we during the assessment, we carry out the research about the choices, their interest, and so their existing practices on livelihood activities. So these are the basic parameters that we consider for the monitoring of our progress. The 5 aspects: their linkage, their social capital, their human capital, the capacities, the training that they have achieved, their skills, and then the economic activity, the physical resources, natural resources there. So these are all 5 capitals we consider while taking the parameters. We form a baseline, we prepare a monitoring evaluation indicators based on that, and based on those indicators we measure the progress. So its progress usually is during the quarterly reports, during 6 monthly, and annually we measure that, and at the end of the project we carry out the evaluation of this one, and we know how we are progressing. Yeah, thank you, Orlando. I hope I answered to the questions.
Yes, Professor, they are very well answered, and yeah, I completely agree. Also with the evaluation, I just wanted to ask that I know the Living No One Behalf framework, they also have certain parameters kind of to see and track like the outcomes of the vulnerable groups. So I just wanted to also highlight this in the conversation. Okay, I'm gonna go on to continue to the second round of other 2 questions. And the first one is by Imeric Conry. And the person says, thank you for presenting projects that are meaningful and will useful to prepare the future for endangered population. And the question is, do you think this way to organize and lead projects can be adapted to other specific situations? Can it be a solution to face the COVID crisis? And the second question is from Agnes Lawrence. And her question is, changing the way the private sector works to be more inclusive requires facilitation activities from your side. What do you do to ensure that sustainable system change within the private sector structure? So just to summarize, the first question is about kind of the relationship that you have done with SAPPROS Nepal in another post-conflict, so in this case in the pandemic conflict, and the second one relates to the work with the private institutions, and then how do you guarantee changes in the private sector? Thank you, Sunit.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Orlando. Thank you for the questions. It's very relevant, particularly this COVID one. So COVID and post-disaster or post-conflict situation, we consider these as the similar situation, because COVID is not less than any disaster or any conflict situation, particularly in a poor country like Nepal. Even in the post earthquake activity, the people suffered by the earthquake already damaged their houses and lost their economic resources. They are again hit by the COVID. So we follow the same process, the same activities even after this COVID situation. We do the assessment, we do the vulnerability, which part is must hit by these pandemics, by these COVID. So mostly we all know that this wage labor and this working class, this seasonal wage labor or seasonal workers, they are most hit by these activities, and they have the food security was the main issue at that time. So yeah, we follow the same pattern, we provide the counseling, psychosocial counseling to them, so that they can stand again, and then provide the include them in the inclusion opportunities for resilience. So even for these ones, so this post-conflict, post-disaster, and this pandemic, so our approach is almost similar, and we have that experience. So one different thing is for these pandemics, because they need immediate support, so we focus on apart the relief support, we focus on quick income generating activities. For example, poultry farming. it can be they can get the harvest within 3-4 months, and so we focus on quick harvesting vegetables and poultry and these set of activities so that they can get income within 3-4 months. So that's another approach, particularly for this COVID. To the second question, to ensure private sector structure, actually private sector is usually considered as the institution or the organization that's only focused for profit. But actually that's not the truth. They also have that social responsibility, but until and unless we make them understand what's the vulnerabilities, what's their responsibility towards these vulnerable people, and how can they support to them, they are not going to it's not going to help, or they are not going to help these vulnerable people. So the first thing that we did was make them understand what's the vulnerabilities, because most of the people, they don't understand what's the vulnerabilities. So how they are suffering, how they are living, what's the level condition, and what's these private sector's responsibility towards them. Because private sectors usually in market system, either they are linked to the input supply or either marketing. So, and these two are the main factors in the value chain. These two are the main actors or main consideration that we have to do. So supply chain, input supply, then the marketing. These are the things. So we supported them. Even these sectors, they are usually neglected. They are not registered, not organized. So we supported this sector. We trained them even in technically. We support them. We supported them in registration. We supported them linking with the local governments, and we supported them linking with the beneficiaries. So now what happened is, we are so glad to share this thing, is that private sectors that were completely out of these, not connected with these vulnerable people, are now providing technical support free of cost, because the incentive for them doing this is the market, because these people, vulnerable people, they are small, but they are many, so they have good market. So this incentive is working, and that's how we are working, linking them, supporting them, and so even we have done the the forward contracting, or the making a MOU between these private sectors and the people, so that they provide the input supply to the beneficiaries in a subsidized rate or in a little rate, and these people help them in marketing. So these type of cooperation and collaboration and support is one of the successful factor for making the ensuring market success structure or market system development in this vulnerable community. Yeah, thank you. Orlando?
Yes, thank you so much for these two answers. And I think what you said is really key in including the vulnerable populations in the value chain ladder. So from the beginning, like these policies of maybe subsidized inputs or other things, I think they're really important policies to include these groups in the market. Just two more questions. So the first one is from Americ, and the question is it a way to bring solutions to the issues communities are living in their daily life? Could we imagine solutions to develop tools that populations can use to imagine their own solutions suitable with the local needs? So it is my understanding that this relates also to empowerment and also the agency of the local communities. And the second question is, how can agri-based technology provide more employment opportunities rather technology is actually decreasing the human employment itself? So yeah, this is of course the question of how technology affects especially agricultural employment in this developing country, and how can technology be further exploited to create more employment.
Yeah, thank you, Orlando, and thank you for the questions. I go to the first one. Yeah, the local community, the solutions suitable to their local needs. I mentioned in my presentation that we have one organization development and capacity building is one of the thematic areas of our organization. And second thing is that we organize these vulnerable people in a group, like a self-help group, inclusive self-help group, so that they are organized, they have their bargaining power, and they have increased access to their rights and entitlements. So this is the one of the important stage and one of the important strategy that we are following, that show that we build the capacity of these people, show that they involve themselves in their development. They decide what their need is. They decide what's their choice is. We just facilitate them to help, whether that is feasible or not in their context, and what are the resources required for that. We help them in planning that thing. We help them preparing the documents for that one, or we help them linking them to the relevant stakeholders or the government agencies, and we help them to empower them to build their capacity in that sector. But basically, it's the local group who decide what development activities are they going to implement based on their local resources, local capacity, and geographic location and other factors. So we do not dictate, or we do not provide any burden to them. So it's basically the demand-driven approach. We do not believe in supply-driven approach. So it's the community who decide their solution. What is their solution? How to implement them? Where to implement them? And when to implement them? We just support them. We just facilitate them to carry out their activities to fulfill their dream. That's how we work. And based on this, another example maybe it's asking agro-based technology, because we are promoting agro-based technology. So maybe it's affecting human employment, or maybe reducing the employment rates because use of the technology. So if in that case, it's not the cases, because we are not focusing on bigger technologies or anything. It's the low-cost technologies that are user-friendly, or particularly the vulnerable people-friendly, and that's easily understandable, or that the vulnerable people, even the illiterate people, can easily use that technology, which are climate-friendly and water-efficient technologies. We are demonstrating and promoting small technologies, small level technology, not a bigger technology that replace the human employment, but that encourage human employment to this. So that reduces the unnecessary burden, particularly of these women and children, on that engage in these economic activities. So it reduces the burden, it reduces the extra workload of these vulnerable people, but encourage in self-employment. So we are carrying out that sort of activities, that sort of technologies, that's tested activities in the communities. It's not the bigger technologies that are replacing human employment. It's a small technology, and that's very user-friendly. That's they can handle at the community level. These vulnerable people, they can learn and use, and they can promote and replicate this set of activities we are implementing. So we are not replacing any human employment, but it's contributing to self-employment. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Orlando.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sunit. And it's really nice to hear about the demand-driven approach. I have been exposed to this in the past, and it's really good because, of course, the change needs to come from within, right? Like all the work would need kind of to empower these vulnerable groups and communities. But of course, let's say the needs need to come from there in the first time. I think we're running out of time, so I'm just gonna highlight the last question. If you can answer it really fast, would be good.
Yep.
So the question is, can you please share how you obtain funding to support these projects?
Sorry.
The question is, how do you obtain funding in SAPPROS Nepal to support the projects and the work you're doing?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. We have different sources of funding for these ones. The first and the most important was the funding by the donor agencies. that they call for proposals and all these things. So we bid for that one, and we succeed. We demonstrated our approaches, strategies. We present them to them, and they trust us, and they provide this funding. So it's a funding. It's a bid. We compete and bid. That's one funding that we get. And second is because this SAPPROS is already now implemented its activities in 30 years. So people in Nepal, most of the people working in developed sector, even the government agencies, they know the competitive advantages of SAPPROS and its strength. So particularly at the local government level, after this post-disaster and all these things, we even work together with the local governments, and we collaborate. They offer us the fund, they offer us the program projects, and request us to support in their this livelihood intervention activities, and that's how we use this one. And thirdly, we generate some of the savings that we get from these projects. So we invest in some cases for the vulnerable people, and we have limitation in one project, or we can't support to some of the projects. So we use this our own fund for this one. Although we are non-profit making organization and we don't have much fund, but for example, the prize money that our chairperson get from this Right Livelihood Award in 2010, that some of we spend on making the food trails and livelihood activities, promoting livelihood activities of the poor people in the most remote part of the country in far western region. So that's how we did, and we have some of this money in our account, and from the interest that we get, we implement these activities. So somehow we are managing these ones, and people trust us and our approaches and these ones. So these are the three different, mainly these are the three different funding sources that we get to implement the activities. Orlando, back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sunit. I'm seeing that we're already running out of time. So I would like to thank, first of all, you, Sunit, for explaining to us and then just guiding us about the challenges of poverty reduction. I wanted to, again, thank you for your work one last time with SAPPROS Nepal. It's amazing work that you're doing there. So I'm happy to know this type of policies being there. And I also wanted to thank all the participants and attendees of the Geneva Challenge, and to the Geneva Challenge group for making this webinar happening. And we hope this helped you to brainstorm a little bit and just to hopefully guide the projects that you're going to be working this couple of weeks or months. So thank you all for participating, and thank you one last time, Sunit, for joining us. Have a great afternoon ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Orlando. Thank you. I hope the people they have at least have some learning or some exposure from our work. So if anybody interested in getting more information, please let me know. I'll provide more information that I have. Or if anyone is interested to come over Nepal and learn from the field, and then they are also welcome. So we will support them whatever way we can. So, and again, finally, thank you, Orlando, and thank you, this Geneva Challenge 2022 team, for giving me this opportunity to share our project activities and our organization's, impacts and our strategies to the wider community. Yeah, I hope you all, the challenge participants, I wish all good luck to you, and thank you very much. Thank you for for joining me in this presentation. Thank you, Orlando.
Thank you again. This is it. Thank you so much for participating. Have a great day.
Yeah, you all. Thank you.